we're looking today at a few more of the Nurbs options, and remember the Nurbs are a set of tools that you can use in combination with splines. All right. So what we're doing today is we've already talked about the lathe Nurbs and the sweeps Nurbs. We're going to talk today about the Extrude Nurbs. So if you want to click on one of those guys and drop it in. And then, of course, right next door to the Nerb setting is the spline setting tools. Now, what Nurbs, Extrude Nurb does is this is kind of like, did anybody have the Play-Doh thing that you like press the Play-Doh down and it extrudes a shape out of it? Anybody have that as a kid? All right, a couple of you did. It was popular when I was a kid. Anyway, imagine these shapes as like a cookie cutter, okay? And then you can kind of like extrude shapes out of them. So go ahead and grab one of these, like a star, or a circle, or any rectangle, any of these closed shapes, like the cogwheel. Let's do that one to begin with here. So what you can do is you drop this into perspective mode. You place the cogwheel into the Extrude Nurbs, just like the other ones, and suddenly you have a dimensional form. So it's taking that spline and then it's extruding out in one direction along that axis. So if we look down below, if you click on the Extrude Nurbs in the Object Manager, and then look down below, you can see the first line in the Attributes Manager shows movement. The first one is the X, and this is the Y, and then this is the Z. So we're moving along the blue axis 20 centimeters. All right. So if you wanted to make it wider, you can change that number. You can scale it up or scale it down accordingly. So if you make this 100, it's going to have more depth to it. Okay. So you can very quickly generate objects that you draw or that you use these primitive spline tools to extrude out to make that sort of cog-like shape. You can control the different subdivisions. So if you go to display and click on the shading with lines, you can see the subdivisions. If we increase this, you'll have more subdivisions. Notice that it's not on the face, it's along the side that you've extruded out, okay? Because the face is actually a cap. So if we click to the caps here, you can see you have different options of the different types of caps. So there's a start cap and there's an end cap. So if we were to do something like changing the caps, like if you have no caps, then you have an open, right, an open space, or a hole rather, right, like a tube. If you include a cap, then, or like a fillet cap, for example, on both the top and the bottom, then you have some control over the type of look that this has. So if we zoom in a little bit so we can see that better, you can also control the different types of the fillet. So this is convex. You could do concave, which gives you a little bit different look. You could do, one step, which gives you kind of a repeated, kind of like stepping down the same sort of shape. You can do two steps. So you can control the different types of look of that edge, and then of course you can also control it via how many steps you have. Well, that's the back. Sorry. Let's see how many steps you have here. Let's change this back to convex. So how many steps you have, and then you can also control the radius. So the larger the radius, the more that face is going to be controlled there. So you see that. Also notice that as the radius gets larger, it starts to interrupt the shape, right? So if you're working with something like text, for example, where the text gets close to one another, you could kind of interrupt that sort of scene by working with the radius in that way. You can also constrain the proportions. So if you hit constrain down here, then when you change your radius, it kind of, instead of pushing it into the outside of the form, it keeps the size of the exterior, and then it pushes the radius to the interior. So notice how when I hit constrain, it's changing the shape of the inside of the cap, but when I have constrain off, it's moving outside of it. Okay, so you can kind of control how you're working with the form in that sort of setting. All right, so that's the extrude. What's cool about this is if we take that, if we just delete, you can delete this one out of there. You can also select text. Text is a really powerful tool to use. What happens when you drop in text is it literally gives you the word text. Okay, so in order to change that, you go down below to the Attributes Manager and you can type anything you want in here. Like Joe is awesome, right? hit return. Or I'm sorry, you just click out of it, and then it will change this in the setting here. Just sort of scroll out. Of course, mine's going to spin for a minute. There we go. Okay. So, and then of course you can change the fonts. You can choose any font you want there. You can change the size. You can also change the horizontal spacing of the letters. So if we space this out, you can have the letters farther apart or closer together. And then the vertical spacing as well. And then if you same thing, you just drop this into the Extrude Nurbs, and then suddenly you have a three-dimensional type. Okay. So this is great. You can do a lot with this. The other thing I found is that if you choose the like the wingdings and the zap fats or whatever those things are that have all the different types of shapes like arrows and stars and all that sort of stuff, you can use those as splines as well. So you can choose those as part of your texture type. So so I would suggest play around with it with the type. I think it's really really powerful. And again, same sort of idea here. If we look closely, I have the same settings on my extrude as I did before. So I have the fillet cap, and if you hit constrain, it's gonna keep the radius of that shoulder within the type. But if you don't, it will constrain outward. And so sometimes this becomes a little bit of an issue when you get type that is very close to one another. It will start to push against itself. So you can control that with the horizontal spacing, or you can control it with the constrain tool. So that's the Extrude Nurbs. Again, you can use primitive splines. You can draw closed splines. You can use type. You can also, what's interesting about this too is if you're working with an Illustrator file and you have a tracing of in an Illustrator, you can actually bring an Illustrator file into Cinema and then extrude that shape out as well. So it becomes really powerful in that way. So if anyone's interested in that, I can work with you to create that sort of form as well. All right.